during the last episode, you mentioned, well, hey, it might not be a bad idea to look at an electric vehicle if that's in your budget. And of course, we've heard from some of the government officials this week that, hey, higher gas prices, maybe that'll help us transition to a more electric economy. So I wanted to find out, does that actually make sense? So here's a couple of quick pros and cons, and I'll throw those out there, and then I'd like your feedback, Psyche. Um, when you look at the cost of actually uh, filling up, so to speak, you fill up your batteries with electrical charge, or you fill up your internal combustion engine gas tank with gasoline. uh, if you look at a Tesla Model 3 versus a Honda Accord, apples to apples, both 2020 model years. Um, and this is an article from Forbes magazine written by Brooke Crothers. It looks like the annual fuel costs for a Tesla Model 3 long range are about $500 a year. And that's based on, I want to say, 1,000 miles a month of use and 20 kilowatt hour, 20 cent per kilowatt hour electricity costs. So obviously electricity is more expensive now than that, but then, gasoline is more expensive too. So annual fuel costs at the time, about $500 for the Tesla, $1,050 for the Honda Accord sedan. So, that's going to depend now on where the electricity rates are versus where the gasoline costs are. But theoretically, it looks like a compelling argument that electricity is cheaper than gas in terms of the use. So that's definitely a pro on the EV side. A con on the EV side is that those vehicles are not inexpensive. And so you have a very high upfront cost to get into an EV. If you're financing that, that's going to translate to a higher monthly payment, which is potentially going to more than offset the costs of the savings that you would realize from the electricity. Another thing to factor in is that most homes do not come with the sorts of charging equipment that's needed for these vehicles. So that would have to be an aftermarket addition in most homes. And the costs of that are going to be somewhere around about $1,000 as well. So you've got some high barriers to entry, but once you have one, it looks like the cost from a month to month basis and a year to year basis goes down. So what are your thoughts now that I've thrown all that out there in terms of, does it make sense or not?
I think a lot of it is going to be based on where you live and what type of infrastructure you have to accommodate your lifestyle. And let me clarify that. We really don't have the charging infrastructure in this country that we need for EVs yet. They are popping up at a record pace, and you are seeing more and more of them. The biggest hindrance to me in the way my lifestyle is you're limited with an EV to how long you can go. And
Right.
you'll have to pull over for even what's a quick charge, 45 minutes. And you pull over for a quick charge at 45 minutes as opposed to filling up your tank for 5 minutes and being back on the road again. So that's really the biggest hindrance to me. Now, having said that, and that's what keeps me from getting one because of my travel style and how I am. But having said that, if you're somebody that doesn't travel like that and you're not on the road a lot and you're home to work, and you're within 100 miles or so, um, if you can absorb the upfront cost and you're in it for the long haul, I don't think it's a bad idea. You it's more predictable. You can you can budget that a little easier, I think, than you can gas, especially the last 4 or 5 years with the fuel prices the way they've been. The way, electricity is a lot of these electricity companies or utility companies, they buy their energy rates on a contract that are typically 2 to 3 years in length. So they're locked into a certain rate. They will go up micromentally, I guess, really small, but they don't usually go up like you see gas prices go up. So
Right.
you can predict that a little bit better. And I like that. And I mean, really, electricity is still cleaner for the environment, even though it may not be produced in the best way. It's still cleaner for the environment than that fuel is.
Well, I think you hit on something that's important there. The transition to a more electrified economy is going to take a good bit of time. I don't think this is something that just happens when a lot more people go down to their local Tesla dealership, because electricity is still predominantly produced with fossil fuels in this country. So even if you're not putting gasoline into an internal combustion engine, someone somewhere is burning some fossil fuel to make the electricity that is recharging your batteries. So the long-term solution is eventually going to be to find a way to get off of fossil fuels on the production side. And that's a conversation that's worth delving into on a future episode. But before we transition to the savings hack, I wanted to present an alternative that is probably a lot more attainable for folks. Let's say that you drive an older model truck or an SUV. There's a pretty good chance that your gas mileage is somewhere in the 15 to 18 miles per gallon range. I know, for example, I was recently an owner of a 2005 F-150 pickup truck, and I was getting about 14.7 miles per gallon in that truck. Well, if you go from 15 to 22 miles per gallon, which basically means either getting a newer model vehicle, or if you can't afford a newer model vehicle, going from an older truck to an older sedan, and you can get something that gets 22 or 23 miles a gallon, that's a 50% increase in fuel mileage, which means a 50% decrease in your fuel costs. So if you're spending $500 a month on gas, which I know is a lot, but just for numbers' sake, if you go from a truck to a car, you're going to see a decrease of 50% in your costs. You're saving almost $170 a month by doing that. That's a big deal. Obviously, you could save a lot more going from an old pickup truck to a brand new Tesla, but most folks can't afford to do that. One thing you can do, though, is look to get into something that's more fuel efficient. If you're already in something that gets 25 or 30 miles a gallon, that's not going to give as big a savings for you on the margin. But if you're in something that is not getting good mileage in terms of, say, 20 miles a gallon or less, you really have an opportunity to save a lot of money by moving into something that's more fuel efficient.
The Purposeful Podcast.